Welcome to the Milestones Motivation and Money Podcast, hosted by Angel Radcliffe. Tune in as we discuss finances, success stories, and inspiring vibes that will help nurture growth.
Welcome back to the podcast. On today's episode, I have a very special guest, Tamara Bee, who is the host of Many Roads Traveled podcast and blog. She's traveled to over 76 countries and she's an avid solo traveler. So she's here to empower and motivate women to travel solo. So Tamara, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Angel. It's awesome to be here.
So I'm excited about this conversation because I mentioned to you how I did my first solo travel 3 years ago. So this is a great conversation and you've traveled, seems the world.
Well, I think it's about over a third of the world. So getting up there.
So how about you tell us a little bit more about you?
Okay, yeah. I'm a Canadian Brit, so born in Canada, but I left Canada in 1993. So that's kind of how long I've been traveling for. Is close to 30 years now. And when I left Canada, I went from Paris to Cape Town by land or water. So my 6-month trip, which I thought I was going to be away from Canada for 6 months, turned into 22 years. So that's one of the things I love about traveling, just the unexpected and how your life can completely change by making literally one decision.
Oh, wow. So you've been to Africa and you live there.
I traveled mostly, but I did work in Durban, South Africa for about 6 weeks or so, just because I ran out of money, basically.
Oh my goodness.
And I decided that for some reason, because remember, this is 1993, so no internet, no cell phones. You can just look up something online. It was a completely different way of traveling. I guess a lot of people say, well, even I say, it was a lot more adventurous because you just didn't know what was going to happen and you were truly on your own. I thought that it'd be cheaper for me to fly out of Nairobi to London, England, than Johannesburg for some reason. So I hitchhiked back up to Nairobi by myself to save money, which took me about 4 months to do.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was a bit crazy. And then it was so funny because I came through Lesotho and Swaziland and Mozambique. So I didn't even go the direct route kind of thing. But every single person who picked me up, which were all men, by the way, usually if they spoke English, the first thing they said to me is, "Are you crazy?" Like, what are you doing?
Wow. Yeah, because if I'm thinking back to early 1990s and there's no internet, there's no cell phone. Oh my gosh, compare that to today and people were solo traveling and now you have information at your fingertips. But to me, that would be really terrifying.
I just turned 23 as well when I left. But you don't know any different. I mean, that's all there was, right? So you're now and looking back kind of thing, oh, if I had the internet. I mean, it wasn't around. So you just kind of got on with it. But I didn't even have a guidebook because my friend who I left with, he had a guidebook for Africa because it was his trip. He planned it all. And it wasn't even my idea. I was going to go to the Caribbean and yacht hitch. I didn't know if that existed, but I was going to make it up if it didn't. So that was my plan. And then he ended up talking me to do this African trip. And then he bailed on me after 5 months, but it worked out for the best. Like I said, that one decision really changed my complete life.
So would you say that with that experience, that's when you embarked on a journey to solo travel?
Yeah. And when I moved to England, I still traveled, but I was just based in England, 98. So I got to England in 94. And then 98, I did all my other trips since have been solo, unless they've been little short 1-week trips with friends or something like that, or partners. But in 98, I went from Amsterdam to Kathmandu by land. And that took me almost a year. And that was completely solo. And again, 98, internet still really wasn't readily available, especially in a lot of these countries. And I definitely didn't have a cell phone. So it was still pretty similar to the African trip. But the African trip was, I mean, in a good way, it was my first trip because it was the hardest, the longest, I mean, most rewarding, I guess, as well. But so every trip after has been pretty easy, even including that 98 trip. And then I've done a few more trips around Southeast Asia, two 5-month trips around Southeast Asia. And I also have lived and worked in India. So I've spent about 3.5 years in India on and off. India is kind of like my third home. It's a full-on country. There's no other country I've been to that's India. It's awesome, but it can be hard as well. My most recent trip was just before lockdown last year. I managed to get over to Central America for a month. And again, I did 6 countries overland traveling and absolutely love Central America. Beautiful. I was amazed at how beautiful the area was.
So I have some questions.
Sure, go for it.
Okay, so the first question, as you started traveling early 1990s, and of course, I want to compare that to present day. And I say present day, as I say that, I'm okay, the 90s, that wasn't that long ago, but
But
of course,
yeah,
we did not have cell phones or GPS outside of those modern technologies that we have now. What's the difference that you've seen within this whole travel world over the last 30 years?
well, obviously you have travel influencers on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube. And it feels much more contrived. To be honest, I don't travel with a photographer. I am the photographer. Even when I did the Central America trip last year. So I just turned 50 as well. So a huge difference. And when I meet other travelers, especially female travelers, a lot of them are in their 20s, which is when I started. And then we start talking and I tell them a story or two from back then. And they're just amazed. Wow, how did you travel back then? It's a whole mystery, right? It's well, pretty much how you travel now, but you have to do everything on the fly. You couldn't book things online before you left home. You couldn't read reviews on TripAdvisor because it didn't exist. So you had to be a lot more independent. Like, few things I learned through traveling, especially back then, is you must have patience. If you don't have patience before you leave, you will learn patience, because especially a lot of the countries I've been to, I don't even know what the term now, underdeveloped, or a lot of people, especially back then, didn't speak English as well. So I learned kind of almost a travel sign language, which, got me by. Transportation was rarely ever on time. And if it was on time, when they would say 4 hours, that would probably be about 8 hours. So you just cannot get too stressed out about things. So that's patience. And other skills you learn, bargaining, but that's a custom in a lot of countries, India and Arab country, Middle Eastern countries. That's part of the culture. It's not a negative thing. They expect that from you, kind of. And just know that you'll always pay more as a foreigner in most countries, a little bit more usually, which is fine because you tend to make more money than they do, right? So a dollar or two, there's no point arguing over a dollar. You know what I mean? That's going to mean a lot more to them than yourself anyways. The amount of places I got invited into people's homes all the time, and for either cups of tea or dinner or lunch. And many times, yeah, we couldn't speak the same language, but it was awesome, like an incredible experience.
And you mentioned one thing that comes to mind, patience, the amount of patience that you would have had to have. I'm thinking about the whole process, booking your ticket. Now we book our tickets online or on our phone. So was it more calling the airport? You're making the phone call or you're walking into the airport. What did that look like?
Well, because I only took 2 flights. One was Canada, Toronto to Paris, and then Nairobi to London. The rest was, I traveled all by land. So when I was booking trains, buses, ferries, like, and water, of course, yeah, you just go to the port or the train station or the bus station and book your ticket. Say, okay, sometimes if I was in a place for a few days and I knew kind of when I was leaving, then I would book it a few days ahead. But other times I didn't have that chance and I would try and book it that day. And then, yeah, obviously a lot of times, no, we're fully booked. So you'd have to just stay put for another day or two until there's available seat.
So with travel, we've talked about you traveling as an adult. Do you remember or did you travel as a child?
We went to the States a few times when I was a kid. Florida, is Disneyland or Disney World? I always forget. The one that's in Florida. We went there twice when I was little. And then the only real big trip we did, my grandfather, he was the construction manager to build a new airport in Antigua, so the island in the Caribbean. So my grandparents lived there for 2 years and they had a beautiful house overlooking the harbor. And this again was back in the 80s. So my family, we went out there and for 2 weeks. And yeah, so I think I was about 8 or something like that. And I just loved it, like loved it. So I think that was probably my first real sense of this is what I want to do, is see the world when I was a kid. yeah, not much traveling really with the family
Yeah,
besides that.
typically people I meet who love traveling, they've been traveling since they were a baby or kid, or they grew up, their parents were probably in the military. And I know it's not always true because I didn't travel as a child. I remember driving to maybe 2, 3 states, but I never got on my first airplane ride until I was in college. And now I love traveling. I'm infatuated. That's my form of self-care. I have to go
Hmm.
somewhere. And then I started a tradition a few years ago of bringing in the new year in a new country. And when we talk about the topic of solo travel, you've traveled so many places. And when I mentioned to people I was taking a solo trip, the first thing that came to people's mind was the whole safety aspect and
Hmm.
what's going to happen and where are you staying and what if someone kidnaps you and all these crazy things. And for someone who's listening and who's thinking about doing a solo trip and traveling solo, and maybe they're thinking about where they can go. You've been to so many places. Do you have maybe your top 5 places that someone should go on a solo trip?
Well, for their first solo trip for a woman,
Sure.
I would probably say Europe obviously is pretty safe. But that's one thing I see so many say travel Facebook groups or things like that. The question that gets asked all the time, which I think is just so vague, and on what do you, is it safe to travel dot dot dot. I just think, well, and it's is it safe to travel in Paris or is it, well, I don't know, is it safe to travel in New York or where you're from? I mean, it's all relative. Don't and basically even on my podcast, I did so many things that you're if you read any travel blog, female travel blogger, any travel influencers, all the things they tell you not to do, I did. So I always say to my podcast, maybe this you should listen to this and think of not what not to do rather than what to do. But I still lived, so and didn't really have any serious anything problems come up. So whether I'm lucky or not, but I mean, the number one thing is listen to your gut. That's what I've always done. Listen to your gut. And if you don't feel safe in a situation, get the hell out of there. Get a taxi or Uber or just go to a busy restaurant or hotel, any building that's open, just go there. And if you do get kind of any hassle, then in Cairo, I had a guy grab my ass. I was in the middle of the day. I'm walking down, just I left the one of the big bazaars, and I'd had a stressful day. And he was walking past me and he just turned and literally fully grabbed my ass. Well, that was it. I just lost it. I punched him right in the face and made a huge scene. And the
Oh
next thing I
my
know, there's
God.
100 people around us and some could speak English. And I was saying what he did. That's not right. You don't, if you do that to a Muslim woman, her family would kill you, man. And yeah, and then women started yelling at him in Arabic. So if anything that happens, yes, you don't maybe have to punch him in the face, but yeah, make a scene because it's not on wherever you are in the world. I mean, sexual harassment is not cool anywhere, and people know that. So that's kind of one of my other little tips, I guess. But yeah, 5 countries or top, probably be Europe. I mean, I loved Central America. It was so easy to travel in Central America. It was awesome. I'd recommend Guatemala or Belize. Belize is super easy because, especially for Americans, because they take American dollars. That's one of their national currencies. So it's Belize dollars or American dollars. So you can just, you don't have to change any money. And they all speak English. And it's a beautiful country. So maybe that would be a good place to go. Southeast Asia is probably, again, pretty easy, especially say Thailand. I've been to Thailand a few times, and I think the last time was a few years ago. And it's crazy. It reminds me so much of Canada, but tropical, because it's super organized with buses and trains, and it's so cheap. You could still get by on probably $25 a day in Thailand easily.
So I went to Panama City. That was one of my
Mm,
solo trips. And actually, what year was, I don't know what year it was, but I rung in the new year there by myself because
cool.
I wasn't dating anyone. Many of my friends didn't have the money. Typically, when I decide to go on a travel, I go last minute, and last minute is
Mhm.
usually 1 to 3 weeks before booking. Or I'm not one of those people who book trips 6 months to a year in advance. It drives me insane because, well, when this 6 months is up, I may not want to go anymore. So, and I mentioned to you, I've been on some solo trips. I went to Cabo, Mexico, Panama City. I've been to Paris, London, Belgium, Amsterdam, and I think I did feel safe in all of those places, but I was also very skeptical looking at people. I never told anyone that I was traveling by myself. When I was checking into the hotel,
Yeah.
of course, I
Yeah.
lied and said, okay, yeah, I got another person coming. Here's their name. I don't know. I would make up these weird stories and I can't
Oh, no,
remember where
yeah,
I
that's a really
was.
good idea.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know where I was at, but, I was sitting by the pool, and I guess the guy had been watching me, one of the hotel workers, the whole time, and he noticed, like, every time I came down, I was always by myself, and he was, "Oh, you're alone." I was like, "No, I'm not."
Yeah, exactly. That's another good tip. Yeah, I never, even with, yeah, most of my trips, well, especially the first few, the African one and then the, Amsterdam to Kathmandu one. Yeah, I would say that I was married. I even wore a wedding ring. And then I would just always say, oh, I'm meeting him at in 5 minutes, a next place kind of thing, or at the hotel or whatever. So that's also a good idea. Not that it really stopped them much, like from verbally at least, trying it on or whatever. But yeah, I do suggest, unless it's with other female travelers, I never say I'm traveling solo, even now.
And I
So,
remember when I was in Panama, it was so hot. It was, December, and it was 90 degrees, so I had on shorts, and they were
mhm,
probably shorter than they, you know, maybe should have been. But I was walking. I did one of those sightseeing buses. So whenever I
mhm.
travel by myself, I like to do that just to get a lay of the land and where I'm going and do I want to go back to this place. And there's groups of people. You hop on, you hop off, and it's usually 10 or 20 bucks. Well, I got off at the wrong stop. I thought I was getting off really close to my hotel, and I ended up pulling up the hotel on my GPS. I had to walk 10 blocks to my hotel in Panama. And I could have easily called an Uber because it was so cheap. I remember only paying 2, $3 to get places.
Mhm.
And I was all just walk, but I was walking down the street and men were driving by whistling. And then I got
Yep.
scared.
Yep. Well, said men do that in our Toronto or New York or wherever. It's not a new thing. Men are different. And they can all be idiots at times. So wherever they're from.
So I guess it is relative and saying the
Yeah,
same thing can happen no matter where you live. But
of course. Yeah. When I lived in Brighton, I lived there for 20 years as my home. And yeah, I'd get it there walking down the street. But I do traveling, it's weird. And if people, women, or some of your listeners are worried about it, whatever, then what I would suggest is just go in your home city or maybe the next city over and just do a weekend by yourself first, right? Just to get used to eating by yourself, or because I don't have a problem with, I mean, I've lived on my own for 20 years, so I don't have a problem with that at all. But I know some people do. So that's kind of a little good tester, is just book a weekend somewhere close by, or even like I said, even your hometown or home city, and just see what it's being on your own for a weekend.
that's a very good tip. And I
Yeah,
always say you just go out on a date with yourself. And
yeah.
some people think it's weird. They're like, oh, you're gonna go to lunch by yourself? You're gonna do a movie by yourself? You have to do those things and get used to being by yourself or not being dependent.
Another thing is, even now, I still get a little bit nervous before I leave on a trip,
Mhm.
even now. But soon as I'm on the plane, I'm super excited. Here we go. No problems whatsoever. So if you do have that anxiety before you leave, that's fine. That's natural. So don't worry about that either. Just go, just do it, and you'll be fine. I love solo traveling so much because it's literally the closest you can get to freedom, real freedom, because you can do whatever you want, whenever you want, go wherever you want. You don't have to ask someone, what do you want for dinner?
I remember when I was in Amsterdam, I didn't realize you could see so much in such a short amount of time. And that's, oh, I could take the train to Brussels. And that's what I did, just a day trip. I
Yeah.
left early in the morning, came back late at night. And I was okay. If I was with a group of people, I'm sure everyone would have freaked out about doing something like that. Leaving the bags at the hotel and just going to a whole nother place. So I want to talk about, of course, the money part of traveling, because depending on where you live, or overall, travel can get expensive. For someone who's been to so many places, I know some of your trips have been mostly via land, but are there any ways to strategize to save and take advantage of deals and
Yeah.
credit
I mean,
cards or different things of how you've traveled? Or what would you tell those listening?
like I said, even now, I still budget travel. So my Central American trip, I think I averaged, so I was there for a month, and like I said, 6 countries, and I probably spent 50 US dollars a day for everything. And that included a lot of excursions I did. I went snorkeling at the reef because the Belize has the second biggest barrier reef after Australia in the world. And it's amazing. So I was swimming with sharks and turtles and all sorts of, and stingrays. So if you took the excursions that I did out, it probably would have been about $35 a day average, which is nothing. I mean, you can spend that on lunch in the States or Canada. You know what I mean? So I would say I always stay in local guest houses or smaller hotels. And that's my trick, I think, is I'm not one of these, I don't need fancy hotels because you're literally there to sleep. You know what I mean? You're out all day exploring. And when you stay in smaller places, and I still stay in hostels because people think, oh, I don't want to stay in a dorm. Well, hostels have gotten so much better these days. And a lot of them offer private rooms, either single or double rooms. But the great thing is there, you'll meet other travelers in the hostel because a lot of them will have shared kitchens, and most of them include free breakfast as well. So you're great. And you can get those. I mean, I use booking.com a lot nowadays if I'm booking in advance, because when I'm on my Central American trip, which is a new thing for me, usually back in the 90s, obviously you can do that. But now when I know I'm on unlimited time, then I do tend to book places to stay before either while I'm on the road or before I even leave, especially the first few nights. Because with booking.com, a lot of them offer free cancellation up to 48 hours before, which is great because if your plans change, you can get your money back kind of thing, right? So that's a good thing.
So you actually mentioned something that I had on the list next, hostels. I've never stayed in one.
What? Oh my
I've
God.
never been in one, but when I see people, I'm in so many travel groups on Facebook and following people on Instagram, and I'm, what the heck is a hostel? And then when they tell me what it is, and I see someone took a picture of, I don't know where they were traveling, but they were bunk beds and a communal space. And I was in my mind, I'm thinking Airbnb, but
So hostels are kind of said so. And they've gotten much, much better. Nowadays, you can get some super flash, really super nice ones. I stayed in one in Costa Rica. It was $10 for the night. Yes, it was in a dorm, but the dorm was huge and it was super nice bunk beds that have little curtains. So you can have curtains around your bunk bed so you have privacy, and everyone has their own light and plug-in for your phone and stuff like that. And it was $10 and it was beautiful. It had a pool. It had this amazing rooftop balcony. And I was there for one night before I flew back to Canada. And I met other travelers within 5 minutes, and they were making this huge feast that they've been working on all day. And they noticed I was by myself and they're, oh my God, come join us. So yeah, I'm meeting with about 20 people on the rooftop, this amazing food that they'd all cooked for free. Obviously, I'd have a few drinks with them and boom, easy. We've just met loads of friends. I'd rather travel longer or do excursions or stuff like that than pay $200 a night for a hotel. I just never would do that.
So let's talk about the safety, because when you're in a hostel, so many other people have access to the same space. Do you recommend for someone to make sure they're taking their things with them, leaving them there?
No, nowadays what you do, they'll give you a locker. So you can, and also most of them, you only have whoever's staying in that room, they'll only have the key to that one room kind of thing. And a lot of them you can change. Sometimes it might only be 4 people in the dorm. Sometimes it could be 32 people. Some of them have female only rooms. So you could just be with women, but they all nowadays, you all have lockers and you have your own key. So that's a little tip, just a little tiny one. So you don't have to worry about that safety wise. I mean, the only thing that's, if you do in a shared room, is people snoring. That was kind of the worst thing, but then you bring earplugs. So, and a face mask, eye masks for sleeping. But a lot of them, mostly I stayed in private rooms and hostels. So you get your own room. Would you rather pay, $10, $15, or $150, $200 for a hotel room? I guess it depends how much money you have and where your priorities are, really. But
I definitely think that that's a big decision to make. I think I'm personally going to go with the hotel until I may try it one day. But
also with hostels, a lot of them will do free walking tours, right? So I can't believe you went to Europe and never stayed at one. Yeah, Europe has amazing hostels.
I did hotels the whole time. I took advantage of points and did the free hotel, and And because even in the States, when I'm in a hotel by myself, I usually prop something behind the door. I don't know, I get nervous. But
But like I said, you can get your own private rooms in the hostels, right? So you could
mhm,
do that there too, right? And
yeah.
it'd still be maybe 20, maybe 15, $20 a night for your own room. And you said you have your own key, you can prop your things behind, do what you do in a hotel room. You're just saving a lot more money. And like I said, most of them includes a free breakfast. Plus you have access to their kitchen, so you can go to the grocery store and cook your dinners. I mean, this is budget trying to save money,
So
right?
it
So
really is Airbnb. What do you call it?
yeah,
A
for
super house
Airbnbs, yeah,
where the person has the breakfast ready for you and
yeah.
okay. I'm
But
gonna be open to it. I'll be open to it in the future. So
and definitely just look on, say, I said booking.com is one I prefer, but look at all the reviews. Just read all the reviews first too, and the amenities, and like I said, you can choose either how many beds in the dorm or your own private room, whether that be single, double, or triple. But definitely check. You'll be amazed, honestly. Why have I paid so much money for a hotel when I could have had this? Because they're Airbnbs, but Airbnbs have gone up quite a lot in price. I've noticed in the last, 5, 10 years.
look,
Airbnbs aren't quite the deal they used to be.
let's talk about traveling during COVID. So you mentioned your last trip was before COVID. So you haven't personally traveled this last year.
No, I mean, Canada's been pretty locked down. I mean, it's the first time our border, Canada-America border, has been closed, I think, ever. And
Oh.
it's been closed for a year now. So that's
So
pretty
with
crazy.
you being more of like this travelnista, so to say, how that impacted you? I know for me, I mentioned travel is a form of self-care for me.
Luckily, I got the Central American trip in. I literally got home March 4th. So, and Canada was locked down 2 weeks later. So I'm so thankful I got to do that one. But yeah, I also was planning to go back to England this summer because I haven't been back to England for 3 years. I mean, that was my home for over 20 years, and all my friends, my family. So I really would love to, because I wanted to go last summer, and obviously I decided I wanted to do the Central American trip instead. But yeah, this summer I really, really want to go. And then when I do that, I'll spend maybe 3 weeks in England going to see various friends. And then I'll do a little 2-week excursion into Europe or something like that. Because I really like to go, because I've been to, well, not all, but a lot of Europe, obviously living in England for so long too. But yeah, Estonia, kind of that area. So northeast Europe, because I haven't been there yet. So, because I really would love to get to 100 countries in the next couple of years before I get too
Yeah,
old.
that's amazing. So I wanna your passport's probably booked up, and how many passports have you been through?
Oh, let's see. I think I'm on my third, third or fourth Canadian and about my third British.
So because when I'm looking at the passport book and they're so small, how many stamps can this hold if you're going to all
Yeah.
these countries?
Well, it
Gosh.
was crazy that that first African trip, I only had my Canadian passport at the time. And I had to get them to put a 10-page extension on my passport because and even that filled up. So that's
Wow.
that's probably my coolest looking passport.
Wow. Yeah, it's so when I first renewed my passport, I remember asking, I was, "Wait, do I get it back?"
Yeah, you
I
get it
didn't know
back.
they sent it back to you. I was like, I was
They
freaking
kind of
out. Like,
cut a
I want
corner
my
off of it.
stamps.
Yeah. Yeah, I know, right? I would have
Oh
been gutted
man.
if I lost mine.
So, with people who've traveled the world, most people tend to be a little bit more culturally aware. Do you
Mhm.
feel as though you are more cultured than the average person due to your travel?
Oh, I would think so. So yeah, don't be prejudgmental or judgmental, I guess.
That's a
Just
good
be open-minded, listen to your gut. And like I said, I've been invited to so many homes around the world by just the nicest people. And it doesn't even matter if you don't speak English, you'll work it out. So you pick up kind of travel sign language.
We're almost to the end of the podcast. So before I let you go, I do want to ask you three questions as it
Yep.
relates to the title. And this is to call it the game show portion of the podcast.
Okay.
All right. So the first question is more so when you think about your milestones throughout your life, what is the biggest or most memorable?
Oh, cheapers. That's a hard one. I was pretty proud when I graduated from university with my Bachelor of Science honors degree in Chinese medicine because that was really hard work for 4 years.
And what motivates you?
I think when I started my podcast and the blog and vlog last year is maybe if I can inspire other women to feel empowered to go solo traveling or just do things on their own, that'd be awesome. And also I have a pretty serious chronic illness. So that's another thing. I've done all this when I've been sick. So that'd be another, if I can influence or encourage people who have chronic illnesses or disabilities, yes, you can travel too, then that would be great. So I
And
guess,
think back to when you're a kid or a young adult. When did you first build a relationship with money?
probably not the best to ask this one because I really hate money. I get for the freedom it gives me to do what I want to do, but I don't particularly that much on a capital level kind of thing. So, and I found traveling around the world, the people who are the most generous were the poorest. And I've met some millionaires and they tend to be more unhappy. So I found yet the poorest people who have literally living in a mud hut were the happiest and were smiling because they had a community. They looked after each other and they would happily share their one bowl of porridge with me or something. So money's a bit of a catch-22 with me, I guess.
All right. Thanks so much. So
Sorry, that's probably, one of the most random answers.
No, thanks. So I've enjoyed our conversation. I'm
That's
sure
been
we can
awesome.
go on and on about travel. One of my
Mhm.
favorite topics to discuss aside from money. And of course, for those people who are listening, do you have any last words?
If any of the listeners want to come virtual travel with me, they can do that on the podcast because that's kind of how I do it in series, and they can come with me on the African trip. And I give you on each episode or destination, I give you up-to-date tips about that area. So when we can go out there again, there's a bit of advice there for you, as well as entertain you with my craziness adventures.
And the podcast is Many Roads Traveled.
I always just have to remind my American listeners because my thing's called Many Roads Traveled, that there's 2 L's in traveled. Because only you guys spell it wrong.
And where can our listeners find this? This is on Apple Podcasts, Spotify.
Pretty much all audios. My website's manyroadstravel.com. So you can find all the links from there. And same thing with social media. Many Roads Travel, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook.
All right. So if you're listening, make sure you tune in and follow Tamara for all of her traveling journeys. And I'm sure she'll probably drop some gems on Instagram. So
try to get TikTok sorted. So that's my latest.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That is the place to be. So especially if travel was open, that would be so amazing right now. Well, Tamara, thank you so much for being here and hope to have you back on another episode.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much.
Stay connected with Angel online on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Miss RMBA. That's MISSRMBA. Be sure to subscribe and review. Join us next time as we continue to empower you through milestones, motivation, and money.